Welcome to the Autism Mom Coach podcast. I am your host, Lisa Candera. I am a lawyer, a life coach, and most importantly, I am the full-time single mother of a teenager with autism. In this podcast, I am going to share with you the tools and strategies you need so you can fight like hell for your child without burning out. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I am so glad you are here, and I hope you are doing well. Today, I have a special treat for you. We are talking to Dr. Taylor Day. Dr. Day is a licensed psychologist specializing in neuroaffirming care for autistic children and families, including very early diagnoses and early intervention. She has a PhD in clinical psychology, and she's the CEO and founder of Dr. Tay Concierge Clinical Care. Her practice integrates the whole family approach, a process she created utilizing evidence-informed principles after seeing a gap in autism care. Dr. Tay, welcome to the podcast. We are so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can we just start off telling us about how you got into this work and how you identified this gap? Because I think that what you are doing is so important and so needed. And so I'm just curious about how this came about.
It comes from a lived experience of being a sibling myself. So I have an autistic brother who's 10 years younger than me. And so I was living and breathing and understanding this autism world long before I ever got into this profession. And one of the things, my brother was diagnosed at 23 months of age, and that was through a lot of advocacy on my mom's part, because even nowadays, that's still on the younger side. Like we absolutely can
Really?
yeah, at that age.
Yeah.
But back then, it almost never happened. And yeah, my mom just knew something was different, wanted to get him the support. And so he got a lot of support. We had therapists in our home for 40 plus hours a week. And so again, this was what we knew and like our family accommodated. But I always talk about no one really supported my parents in this. And then in turn, they didn't always know how to support me through this journey as well. So I think that was a big thing. And then when I got into this field and became a psychologist and was doing all my training, I was like, it's been like, what? It would have been like maybe 15 or so years at that point. I'm like, how has this not changed? Like, how are we still so focused on the autistic child, which is so important and not something we want to fade, but how has it not expanded? So it wasn't until my final year of training in my PhD program, we do a clinical internship. So you're a full-time clinical that at Duke University Medical Center, I got the opportunity to do a family therapy rotation all year round. And it wasn't for like specific for autism. And it just completely changed the way that I think about therapy and that I was doing therapy. And I realized it wasn't something that was very common in the autism world. And I just took a lot of what I learned there, what I had learned throughout my training about autism. It took a little bit of time. I went into research first before I started my clinical practice. But it was one of those things, lived experience. And then my clinical training really helped me to develop an approach that feels so aligned for me and helps families in a way that my family wasn't helped.
Wow, that is just so profound and important. And I always think about when I have clients who have siblings, kids with autism with siblings, and I see that these siblings are going into areas of their own study and research that are supportive of the community. It's like you could not have a better advocate at your side. Tell me if you can identify it as a sibling growing up with as a brother with autism, like where did you not feel supported? Where were the gaps for you?
Well, I think that some of it is one, my world completely changed. So I was an only child until I was 10. We're 10 years apart. And then my brother came into the world. And even when he was born, my mom had a very traumatic birth. And so my brother was in the NICU, like from the outset, it was a different experience. But I think one of the biggest things, I actually have an episode where I dive into this on my podcast. I have an episode where I also brought my mom on the podcast because this is something we openly talk about. I'm not going to go out and talk about it publicly without having talked about it in my own family first. But I had this mentality. No one told me this. And I talk about this a lot of, well, my brother needs help. Therefore, I can't need help. And that's how
Mm,
kids' brains think, are in very black and white ways, right? Of, "Oh, well, I need to downplay what I need because he needs it." And we know as adults, like, even listening to that, we know that's not true, but we don't realize sometimes for kids how their brains think. But I even talk about this with parents, that this ends up being a very common pattern that I see with parents too, is my kid needs help, therefore I can't need help. And so all of our brains can have this
yeah.
tendency to think in black and white ways. And we have to realize the nuance in all of it.
That's so interesting because I was diagnosed with ADHD later in life, and my mom and I talked to her about it. She's, "Oh, yeah, I know, obviously." And, "Well, like, why didn't we address it?" And then the answer to me was so obvious. I wasn't the house
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
fire. And I think that there is that, like, when there's somebody who has acute needs, that is where all your focus goes because you feel like you're in this sort of life death
Yeah.
battle. So, what about what were you able to see at that age and identify the gaps for your family, or is that something that came with
Oh, that's definitely
perspective?
something that came with perspective because I think at that point it was just, okay, like what is my role? And so I stepped very clearly into this helper role. I also, and I think some of this
Mhm.
is inherent of my personality. I don't think all of it was this artifact of having an autistic brother, but I can be very perfectionistic, very high achieving. So that was one of the roles that I ended up taking is, okay, like, how can I get attention in other ways? What are those ways to garner that? And it was always like getting good grades, like doing winning things and doing like those extra things. And it just came so naturally. But I didn't have insight
Wow.
into it. That was just who I was. And one of the most profound things for me was going to therapy. Probably, I think about 3 years ago, I started. And the irony is, I'm in the field, right? You would think that I had gone to therapy and it was like normalized for me and everything. But the way that I was largely trained as a psychologist is, okay, what's the diagnosis? And then you seek out therapy for that diagnosis. And I wasn't, because I was trained in a very evidence-based program, that's really how we approach things, from a very data-driven thing. And I realized there was this whole other side of the therapy world that it was like, no, you can go to therapy just to have a space and container to be able to hold and to process. So I finally was like, okay, I need to do this. I got into some coaching first and had a coach, and then started like peeling back the layers. But doing a modality that's called internal family systems, or IFS, was,
I would think as soon as I was thinking about that immediately.
it was
Okay,
so
yeah.
profound, and I had never done that as a psychologist. Now I
Mhm.
incorporate it into my work all the time, but that
Mhm.
helped me to understand these different parts and how they all contribute to one another, and what was in the driver's seat when I was a kid tends when what we learn in early childhood tends to be the default of then what we do as adults, but realizing those parts don't always have to be in the driver's seat. Sometimes we need to help them come up to speed with everything else that our brains know, and we can choose to do it differently. But a lot of times these are protector parts that have served a role, and they're used to doing that. And so it was just such a helpful modality. So definitely through my clinical training, but also through my own healing journey in all of this as well.
That is so interesting. And I think like as soon as you started talking, I was thinking, oh, like you use research and analysis as your way, as like a coping mechanism, right? In some sort of way, right? And then you look back at that and you're like, God, how brilliant was I at that young age to have incorporated that and how that served me, but then also being able to see the function it was playing, right? And now that you also have the space, I think that is
Yeah,
so
and it
amazing.
led to a complete career change. When I say, like, I went into research, I was in academia. That was my plan all along. And then I got into that world, and research is incredibly important. I still use it, but it wasn't for me anymore, especially as I started peeling back the layers because there's such a high achieving, what's next go, not recognizing the accomplishments. A lot of times it's, oh, you published a paper, cool, what's the next one? And I started to realize like I wasn't getting fulfillment out of that when I took away. I still have the part that's very high achieving, but when it wasn't the thing that was driving me every single day. And what I started to realize, it took me a while to admit this, but I was like, wait, I do love clinical work. I didn't think I did. And I think some of it was this. I think some of it was getting to do it in the way that I wanted to. I didn't love this. Okay, the patient shows up. You use this chapter of the manual and do it. And it was like, wait, I want to like connect. And I don't want it to be this like static and like it's got to go this way. And that's the cool thing about opening my practice is I can choose to do clinical work the way that I want and the way that feels aligned. And so, yeah, it's been a really cool journey.
That's awesome. I'm curious, do you see you in some of your parent clients of this high achieving, this is how I solve a problem?
Oh, the
Yeah. And I yeah, that was definitely me. I'm going to out research, out resource this, and we're just gonna this will be in the back seat at some point. It'll just be in the rear view mirror. And I see this with my clients too, and like the failure that they feel that they haven't quote unquote solved this, right, for their child. I'm wondering if you could speak to that and how you
yeah,
approach
I
that.
mean, absolutely. And the thing is, I share this story openly because one, yeah, it is helpful for families when they're hiring me to know not only do I have the professional experience, I have this lived experience as a sibling, but I'm also
Yeah.
very transparent. I'm not perfect in this, right? I'm just a few steps ahead of you in this journey and then can
Mhm.
pull in my knowledge too. But as a human being, it's not like I have it all figured out. And I'm just open and I choose to be vulnerable in that way. But really, what a mentor or a guide of any sort is, it's just someone that's a little further along in the journey than you are. A lot of times and I have a coach that I work with right now that I look up to her and I'm like, oh, she's got it all figured out. And then I remember, nope, she's human in this too. And so but I think that
Yeah.
lived experience actually really helps us understand what our clients are going through and how to support. And I think over research mode and overthinking mode is probably one of the biggest areas that I see parents be stuck in and feeling like they have to figure it
Yeah.
all out before they try something. And sometimes then, even if they jump in, because they're expecting such this high bar and like that they figured it all out, the troubleshooting becomes difficult. Well, that didn't work. It's like, how long did you try it for? And I think that is a big piece. And it's one of the gaps that I saw. And I love working with families in an intimate way in clinical services, but I actually developed a membership where families can ask me questions. I can provide some next steps and some education in order to get things moving, right? And it's let's try it out. You're not sure? Let's come back to the table. And so I think working with someone too, if you're really stuck in this cycle, and I know that you do this work as well, it is so critical because otherwise you're just like in this constant cycle that's hard to escape. And having that outside perspective can really shift that dynamic.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess I feel like in the in the autism world that there is this belief, probably really supported by everything that's out there. Do this, do that. That if you do enough or you do the right things, then your child will be okay, whatever that is for you, right? And I see myself getting really stuck in that as well as, well, did I not do enough? Did I not do the right things? And I see it in my clients too. And I think it's a really hard area because there's so much
Mhm.
uncertainty in autism. And then you bring in the comorbid diagnoses and just how that sort of soup interacts, right? It's a no man's
Yeah,
land in some ways.
absolutely. And that is a big part of my work that I work with parents on is it really is grief that you're processing. And I
Yeah.
always am abundantly clear. You're not grieving your child. You're grieving the shift of expectations, those subconscious thoughts of how you thought your life would look like and how that's different. And you're grieving the fact that your child does live in a very neurotypical world. And so that means that they're going to have times where they have more challenges. And that's really hard as a parent to sit with. And so you're grieving that. And some of it is I often find parents want to skip that. And they're like, okay, we're good. Like we hop into action mode. And this is what I find post diagnosis a lot is like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, okay, great. We're supporting your child, but can we slow down and actually feel all these emotions, know how to process through these emotions? Because we have to go through that journey before we're ever going to get to a place of true acceptance. And I think that's some of it is like when you're not feeling enough, there's a part of you that feels like you're failing. And we need to work with that part to really accept what the conditions are, so to speak.
That is so beautifully put and said.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Really, truly.
I mean, it's literally listening to parents all the time of it's a collaborative relationship. So I didn't develop all of this in a silo. It's literally sitting in front of parents and hearing this processing and hearing where they're getting stuck. And I do want to emphasize, I think
Yeah.
this is one of the hardest things that I find for parents to do is actually seek support for themselves because it's again that mentality of my child needs help, therefore I can't. And it can feel very selfish or it can feel like I don't have time to do this, which is why I developed the whole family approach. Because when I first started my business, I was like, okay, I want to support parents. And I wasn't getting traction. And I realized being full forthcoming of, okay, we can't just isolate it out. Like we have to say, I'm also going to help your child in this because that's such a high
Yeah.
value. But it is so, so important. And it's about starting, I like to think of it like a big ball of yarn. We just need to start pulling on some strings. So it's not about, oh, you need to focus on yourself and go all in. It's like, what are those little strings we can pull in the ball of yarn right now? And I think that's also sometimes where I find the field or like social media, it's do self care as a parent of an autistic kid. And then your body, if you're a parent listening to that, is no, because I don't have time. That's selfish. Or I don't know where to start. And it's okay, what is that one tangible thing we can start working on, that string that we can start to pull?
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I have to say, I don't know if I ever, well, definitely, I don't know if I ever consciously felt that it was selfish to seek out help for myself. I truly believed I needed to fix this. And once I did, I would be fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine. This is the issue, right? And when I hit the wall on that and realized how I was impacting my son, like that's really what it started to turn
Yeah.
it around for me. But I see the same thing in clients too, is they're like, oh, I want you to help me with my kid. I'm like, I definitely will. But
Yeah.
here's the thing. You are the environment, right? And you need the support as well because you are like the through line for your child, right? No matter like what's happening. So yeah, it's a
It
hard
is.
shift to
And I
make.
find parents often, not always, but often seek us out when they feel completely helpless and hopeless, right? They feel like
Yeah.
they have no more options. And so they're like, fine, I'll try this, whatever. And this,
What do you got? What do you got?
exactly. And so this is where talking about this, I think, is so important because we can do that before you hit rock bottom to really work
Yeah.
through all of this. And this is where for me, the whole family approach comes into play. I like to think of the family as an ecosystem, right? Everything
Mm.
relies on one another. We can't just say, let's just work on your kid. Because if you are so stressed out and you're human, you're allowed to be stressed out, you might not have the capacity for your kid to co regulate with you, right? And so that's one tangible example of where it could be impacting your kid. And ironically, a lot of your stress could be coming from the fact that you're driving to 500 appointments and advocating and sitting in IEP meetings and just feeling, oh, what am I supposed to be doing? Everyone is relying on me to know the answers and I don't, right? So it's this vicious
Wow.
cycle. And
Yeah.
we can make so much faster progress when we target like all parts of the ecosystem or at least multiple at once.
Yeah. No, that's great. Great. Well, I'm going to do a
Yeah.
almost like a hard shift of topic because when I was on your podcast, we started to have a conversation about
Mhm. Yeah.
accommodation, demands, accommodation, and that line. Where is the line? And for autism parents, I've been described by a therapist as being having a meshed relationship with my son at some point. And I think for so many of us, like that's necessary at some point, right? Like we're their eyes, their ears, their voice, we're interpreting, we're trying to figure things out. But I also think that as things evolve, we can stay in that position and have a harder time letting go. And so I just want to hear from you how that comes up in your practice and how you think about
Yeah.
it and address
Before
it.
I dive into that, I just have to say I got such great feedback on our episode. People just loved it and the conversations we were having. So yeah, people absolutely loved that. But yeah, this was one of the things that came up. And I think we didn't have a lot of time because we were talking about other things. But really
Yeah.
thinking about, I talk with parents a lot about this of what is accommodation where you are supporting your child and when does it become over accommodation? And as simplified as this seems, even just sitting with that question of, am I accommodating my kid or am I over accommodating my kid? And we don't often think through this. And so you're in autopilot mode. You're so used to doing it. I
Yeah.
find most of the time when parents sit with this question, actually, I have a group therapy model where I work with parents and do parent coaching. I was talking about this 2 days ago, and like multiple parents are like, yep, I know I over accommodate, right? And some of it is sometimes that comes from this place of you previously needed to do that because your kid didn't have the skill set and you just haven't pruned things back, right? Like they still need the goal of accommodation is never to completely fade it. It's always to make it available. Now, that doesn't mean your child is always going to need it or use it, but we always make it available. And this is one thing that I find with the school system is a hard thing. Like, oh, but they're doing great. They don't need it anymore. And it's no, we need to make it available for them because what if they have a hard day? What if their capacity starts to get a little bit more tapped? What if there's a new novel area they're going into? And so, keeping that in mind, the goal is not to prune all accommodation back, but sometimes we might actually be doing too much and not allowing the child to show us the new skill set that they have.
Mhm.
Sometimes it comes from a place of great intention, but a lot of anxiety at the same point of, well, what if I don't do this? This is what my kid needs, and having a lot of worry there. I think, and then some of it is just like the default mode. That's really what it is. And so I think coming back to what does my child need in order to thrive? But where do I sometimes as a parent have to step back and let them learn and trial and error? And we don't want to thrust a kid into a world that they're not ready for. That's not what we're saying. But for example, I have a lot of families that resonate with the PDA profile. And then they learn about PDA and then they go into this world of, okay, lowering demands. Unfortunately, with social media, the way that it's often talked about, and there's so much nuance with this. And I do work with families on
Yeah.
lowering demands, but I'd say one of the main reasons that a lot of these families seek me out is they've gone almost to no demands and it is burning out the family ecosystem like no other. And they feel exhausted. They don't know where to go. And so sometimes we actually work to understand what demands we need to add back in, what boundaries we need to add back in, still within this low demand framework. But that's a great example of over accommodation of, oh, well, I'm supposed to be dropping demands. Oh, so I don't expect anything out of my kid. And a lot of times too, like we don't need to be skill building all the time in your kid's journey, but that's not a place that they're going to skill build from. And so sometimes we do prioritize the mental health and we have fewer demands, but then once kids come out of burnout, how do we start layering some of this in as well?
Yeah, it's so incredibly nuanced. And just a couple of things. One of the things that I see, especially with my clients whose children might have gotten, let's say, a later diagnosis, is they're like, well, I don't want to basically penalize them for being autistic and basically be abusive in that way. They're autistic. I can't do this. So there's that piece. But I would say one of the bigger areas that I've had when it comes to that piece is my own anxiety slash fear of with if and when I pull back, the clapback I'm going to get from my child and not wanting to endure it essentially. Right. And so I had to learn, and I talk to other parents now, is get ready. There will be the clapback, but that's not necessarily a problem. But that's really hard when you're like, okay, in a container, that's great. But when I'm trying to get out the door in the morning and there's another child and I'm late for work, there's so many things that can factor into it and makes it really easy to be like, well, I'm just not, just go back to the default.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely. I think that, yeah, I mean, it is so nuanced, is what it comes down to. I always say, though, when we're making these shifts, and this is a big mistake that I see with parents, is they just try it, right? And then they're trying to teach in the moment. Your kid's already dysregulated, so they're not thinking with logic and reasoning. You're likely dysregulated. That is not the moment that we are skill building, like ever. And so some of it is, how do we prepare them for that? And how do we start talking about that? And sometimes that work of preparation actually comes from two different places that are not directly related to this, but are highly entangled with this. Is number one, you processing your grief in all of this, right? Of again, really coming to this place of acceptance. And some of it is, we're not talking about like you just saying, "Oh, everything's fine," acceptance, but it's like understanding your reality and understanding what you have to navigate and not trying to cling onto it and control everything. And maybe
yeah.
you've come to acceptance in other ways, but this might be a new playground that you got to play with. But the other thing is, and I find this is missing a lot, is how much are we helping your child to understand themselves and their brain and what their neurotype is? And I think this is so incredibly important. And it's not a quick conversation. It really is ingrained over and over. And so this is a great example of where I would be talking once the kid understands themselves and starts to understand some of those support needs, some of the strengths, like even talking about, hey, we are going to make some changes. Here's why. Your body is probably going to feel really uncomfortable, right? My body is probably going to
Mhm.
feel really uncomfortable. It might feel really hard, but we're going to figure it out together. And one of the frameworks that I love and I teach parents a lot of is, let's call it an experiment, right? Okay, we're going to do an experiment
Mhm.
together. And here's the thing, I really need your input of what this feels like. And then if your child doesn't have consistent spoken language or a consistent mode of communication, we can use their behavior as their communication and as feedback. But it's about experimenting. Did this work? Did I try to do change way too much at once? Right? It's okay. I'm going to let my kid be independent in their morning routine. And it's okay. That probably isn't realistic. Maybe it's okay. I'm going to let them pick out their outfit today versus even get dressed by themselves today. And was that possible? How did that go? How can we tweak it a little bit? But if your child is a collaborative partner in this too, and I think that often increases buy-in.
That's so these are such great points, and I remember for my son, he's severe OC, I was starting to fade back the reassurance of, right, that loop that I was in with him, and what we had to do, and we did this in partnership with someone like you, a therapist, clinician, is say, "Listen, this when your OCD is saying you need mom to say whatever over and over, mom is gonna say, 1, the answer. Second is I've answered your question. And then third, she's not going to respond to you. But really previewing that because if I just did that cold, he would have been
No.
like, yeah, whispering. And so we had to actually come up with even like a sort of like I would put the stop sign up and I'm saying that's my signal that I really do care, but this is just me trying to help you with your OCD. But there was a lot of previewing of that because I had been in that loop with him. And so just to do cold turkey, but it's been very abrupt and dismissed, startling to him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of this idea of previewing or prepping and just talking through it. And remember, it's not one time. you have to do this, right? Like it's over and over again. That's what we know about many autistic kids is that repetition is really supportive. And also, that's a little more nuanced and tricky with the mental health piece. But can we also have you as the parent modeling this as well? That's
Yeah.
such a helpful way. So they get to see it. And also, that is almost, if we think of an exposure framework, that is a step of the exposure, right? They see you doing it, and then they're like allowing their nervous system to adjust to it as well. So, yeah, there's so many steps in this, but I think a simple piece just for listeners to come back to is again, what is that asking yourself the simple question and trusting your intuition. Is this accommodation or
Mhm.
is this over accommodation? And I want to highlight this part that you said like at one point you had a therapist say, about enmeshment. And sometimes we do
Mhm.
have to remember that outside people aren't going to understand. Whether sometimes I do see families seeking out providers who maybe don't really understand autism as much as maybe they ideally should. Sometimes this is
Yeah.
family members too that are constantly questioning, well, why are you doing this? And this is a script I gave to one of my parents I'm working with recently. What am I supposed to say when people say, well, that's not normal? Like, why do you keep doing this? And I like to actually use an agree, then explain method of lean in and say, yeah, you're right. It's not normal. And my child is neurodivergent, so I have to do things differently as opposed to constantly battling of being like, well, let me tell you why
Yeah.
I have. It's lean in and agree with
Yeah.
them. Yeah, you're right. That isn't normal in all of this. But I think that is an important piece too, is realizing other people might not always understand, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're over accommodating. They just might not understand how your child's brain is wired and what the supports they need and what's going to really help them to thrive.
Yeah, no, agreed. And in this context, I mean, it was a provider we'd been with for a while, and he was with us through a really acute moment. In that moment, what he was describing is Ben's was so focused on me for his emotional regulation, and we were just in this, and we were like, literally, it was COVID. We were like just like together like this, right? And it's yes, that is what's happening, and you're right, but it's also the thing that is keeping everyone safe at the moment. And so it's again, it's so
It is.
nuanced,
What a great
right?
example of what you're describing was named as enmeshment actually was a over accommodation versus another family could work with a provider. They're naming it as enmeshment. Maybe this provider doesn't have the autism knowledge,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
maybe that's just simply accommodation and it looks different, right? And so I think yeah, so I think it's such an important point that the same behavior might be over accommodation for one family in a certain context, and that same behavior could be accommodation for a different family that's at in a different set of conditions and context.
Absolutely. And I think so much of it goes back to what you said before about the parents trusting their own intuition and this being nuanced. And so I think that there's like that old school of consistency looks like same thing every time. And that is not what it is to live in the autism world.
Right. But yet, a lot of parents of autistic kids, their brains crave that, the predictability and the consistency. And so I think this is something just to be mindful of because it can feel like, especially if being very perfectionistic, just to tie this back, because it really
Yeah.
is all
Yeah.
needed. It can feel almost like a failure, right? If every day you're used to doing something and then it doesn't work one day, and it can create panic. Oh gosh, why didn't it work? And it's okay, but did the conditions change, right? Is
Mhm.
someone more stressed? Does someone have lower capacity? Was there a part that maybe you thought you did, but you didn't do? And that actually, maybe you didn't do as much prep and preview. And it's, oh, that's a great marker. No, that's actually not over accommodation. That really sets my child up for success. And so sometimes those hardships actually allow us to evaluate what is working and what truly is effective and get out of that autopilot mode of, okay, I always do it this way. You get to prune a little bit and decide what's important there.
Oh, wow. It's so helpful. Dr. Tate, thank you so much for coming on having this conversation. Please tell us, how can families find you? How can they work with you? What are you offering? Give us the good.
Yeah, absolutely. So My main website is just drtaylorday.com. It talks about my clinical services. We do diagnostic evaluations throughout the lifespan. I actually have a psychologist that works with me as well that specializes, in older like kids, like teens and adults, and working with parents to explore their own neurodivergence, which can be an important part of this. We offer therapy services, including a unique group therapy model. And then as I referenced, we actually have a educational membership. So these aren't clinical services for families that are looking for, maybe you have a therapy team, but you're looking for a little bit more support and to get out of this cycle of overthinking.
Perfect. We will link all of that in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you on. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Autism Mom Coach podcast. I will talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Autism Mom Coach. If you are ready to apply the principles you are learning in these episodes to your life, it is time to schedule a consultation call with me. Podcasts are great, but the ahas are fleeting. Real change comes from application and implementation, and this is exactly what we do in my one-on-one coaching program. To schedule your consultation, go to my website, theautismmomcoach.com, work with me, and take the first step to taking better care of yourself so that you can show up as the parent you want to be for your child with autism.